What if the most pivotal individual you'd ever cross paths with was someone everyone else overlooked? In the opulent lobby of one of the world's most prestigious hotels, a quiet, elderly man from Japan became nothing more than an inconvenience, an issue to be swiftly dealt with. His peculiar requests were the subject of ridicule among the staff, and the hotel manager, Arthur Davies, was itching to see him gone. But there was one person who saw beyond the surface. Clara Mitchell, a waitress caught in the suffocating grip of her own past and mounting debts, recognized something in him that no one else could. She saw a story unfolding, a story that would eventually change everything. When she, for the first time, spoke the 3 words in Japanese that no one else understood, she didn't just shatter the silence in the room, she unlocked a secret, one that had the power to dismantle the entire foundation of her world. The Grand Elysian Hotel, once simply a place of luxury, was much more than that. Beneath its gleaming marble and polished glass, a billion-dollar deception thrived. A labyrinth of secrets and power resided within the walls of this extravagant hotel, a haven for the elite who expected nothing less than perfection. Nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago, the Grand Elysian was a monument to wealth and ambition, where opulence wasn't flaunted, but expected. The elite didn't need to announce their presence. Their wealth was an unspoken law, and the hotel's staff were there to uphold it, effortlessly. Every tray carried must be balanced with grace, every wine pairing memorized, and every smile must be believable. Perfection was demanded, and imperfection was an unforgivable sin. Clara Mitchell knew the drill all too well. At 26, she had become nothing more than a shadow in her pristine black and white uniform. Her personal life, entangled with the weight of her father's medical bills, an apartment's overdue rent, and the unrelenting student loans, was slowly suffocating her. The hotel, for all its gilded allure, was a prison. She was just another cog in the machine, working tirelessly for survival. Then came Mr. Watanabe. He arrived on a Tuesday, but not with any fanfare. No limousines, no entourage, just a man. An elderly gentleman, dressed immaculately in a simple, yet clearly expensive, charcoal suit. His presence was commanding, but silent. His age was etched in the creases of his face, but his posture remained regal, unbowed by the years. He checked in quietly under the name Mr. Watanabe. And the trouble began immediately. Mr. Watanabe didn't speak a word of English, no words at all. He communicated through gestures and small, polite bows, things the hotel staff couldn't interpret. He didn't own a smartphone or rely on translation apps. Instead, he kept a small, leather-bound notebook, in which he occasionally wrote. The concierge, a polyglot who boasted fluency in 5 languages, tried to communicate in every language he knew, Spanish, French, German, and even Mandarin. But Mr. Watanabe just smiled serenely, offering no indication that he understood. Within a day, he became a problem. The hotel's manager, Arthur Davies, a picture of corporate ambition and anxiety, was increasingly frustrated. The 5-star rating of the hotel was sacred to him, and Mr. Watanabe was a walking disruption. He points at the room service menu, Davies complained in the staff briefing room, pacing like a caged animal. We brought him filet mignon 3 times yesterday. 3. Then he just shakes his head and waves it away. The waste is astronomical. Someone find out what he wants. The whispers grew louder. Mr. Watanabe's silence, in a place built on constant communication, became intolerable. He was seen as the eccentric rich man, a senile tourist who couldn't grasp the language or the customs of the hotel. But Clara saw him differently. To her, he wasn't just a nuisance, he was a person. She had a personal connection to his world, one that ran deep into her own memories. Her late mother, Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, had been an esteemed professor of East Asian studies, a specialist in Japanese culture. As a child, Clara was raised not on cartoons, but on stories of samurai, tea ceremonies, and haiku. The rhythms of Japanese language and culture were woven into the fabric of her earliest memories. The sound of her mother's voice, patiently correcting her pronunciation, was the soundtrack of her youth. After her mother's death, and with her father's sudden health crisis, those years of cultural connection had been buried under the heavy weight of survival. Speaking Japanese was like dusting off an old photograph, bittersweet, and filled with both joy and pain. But when Clara looked at Mr. Watanabe, she heard the echo of her mother's teachings. His silence wasn't a barrier, it was a conversation waiting to happen. On the third day of Mr. Watanabe's stay, his presence had become the hotel's focal point. It started innocently enough, with a simple request for tea. In the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant, Aria, he tried, through small gestures, to ask for something. "He wants tea," Kevin, a flustered server, muttered to his colleague, Jessica, Clara's rival. Jessica, sharp and merciless, shrugged. "Well, give him the Earl Grey." They brought him Earl Grey. Mr. Watanabe gazed at the cup, then shook his head. A slow, deliberate refusal. They tried again with English breakfast. Another shake of his head. Chamomile. Green tea. Oolong. Each time, a polite rejection. The frustration in the air was palpable. By now, even the manager, Arthur Davies, had been summoned to oversee the matter. The tension in the air was thick, an air of mystery that Clara felt she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about tea. There was something else at play here, something deeper, hidden beneath the surface of this silent, elderly man and the chaotic world around him. And Clara, whether she was ready or not, was about to uncover the layers of deception and secrets that would change everything. His face was a mask of strained politeness. "Sir," he began, speaking loudly and slowly, as though the guest were deaf rather than simply not speaking English. "We have many types." Mr. Watanabe responded by opening his small notebook and writing a few characters in it, before presenting it to Davies. The manager stared at the writing, bewildered, as if it were a foreign language he could not even begin to decipher. He thrust the notebook at Kevin, who passed it on to Jessica. No one had any clue what it meant. "This is ridiculous," Davies muttered under his breath, his patience thin. "He's doing this on purpose." The entire restaurant staff, their eyes unwillingly drawn to the drama unfolding at table 7, couldn't help but observe. The atmosphere became thick with awkwardness and frustration. Clara, who was clearing a nearby table, could feel the tension, like static in the air. The sound of Mr. Watanabe placing his cup back onto its saucer reached her ears, followed by the soft click of his fingers brushing the edges of the table. And then, in the silence that had built up around them, his voice broke through. It was soft, almost reverent, but unmistakably clear. It was a single, perfectly articulated phrase in Japanese. Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. The tray she was holding suddenly felt weightless in her hands. The words weren't just familiar, they were precise. They took her back to moments in time, to the soothing tone of her late mother's voice as she corrected her Japanese pronunciation. The words Mr. Watanabe spoke were not just a request for tea. They were a request for something much more specific, an exquisite, high-grade roasted green tea brewed at a precise temperature. Jessica, standing nearby, let out a dismissive snort. "It's just gibberish," she sneered. "He's probably lost his mind." But Clara felt something snap inside her. It wasn't just the casual disregard for Mr. Watanabe's request that stung. It was the sheer ignorance. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was disrespect. Not just to the man, but to her mother, to the world she had once known, and to the beauty in the details that had once filled her childhood. She set her tray down on a service station, her heart hammering in her chest. Every part of her being screamed at her to stay invisible, to avoid drawing attention, to get through her shift. But her mother's words echoed through her mind like a siren call, "Language is a key, Clara. It doesn't just open doors. It opens people." Clara squared her shoulders, straightened her apron, and made her way toward table 7. Davies, noticing her approach, shot her a look filled with fury. "Mitchell," he hissed, "what do you think you're doing?" Clara didn't respond to him. Her eyes were locked on Mr. Watanabe, whose gaze met hers with an intensity that sent a chill through her. He didn't speak, but his eyes seemed to pierce through her, as if silently encouraging her. Clara inhaled deeply, bowing slightly from the waist, just as her mother had taught her, before speaking in fluent Japanese. "Forgive the confusion, sir," she said with perfect clarity. "Would you care for hojicha brewed at 80 degrees Celsius?" The silence that followed was palpable. Kevin's jaw dropped in disbelief. Jessica stared at Clara, her eyes wide, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. Arthur Davies looked as if he had been struck by lightning. Mr. Watanabe's face, which had been a mask of serene detachment since his arrival, shifted. For the first time, a true expression of astonishment crossed his features, followed by a slow, genuine smile that spread across his face. His eyes lit up, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. He responded in kind, his voice a low, smooth baritone laced with a mixture of surprise and something else, relief, perhaps. "You understand," he said, his words carrying the weight of an unspoken truth. "Yes, that is exactly what I would like." "Thank you." Clara bowed again, a flush creeping up her neck. "It is my pleasure, sir. I apologize for the delay." She turned to the stunned staff, snapping back into her professional persona. "I need a pot of hojicha, the loose-leaf kind from the presidential suite pantry, not the bags. And I need a thermometer. The water must be precisely 80 degrees Celsius, no hotter. Also, bring the Kenji-style teapot, the small ceramic one." Kevin stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to comprehend. You speak Japanese?" Clara shot him a cool, authoritative look. "Just get the tea," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The staff scrambled into action, suddenly aware of what was required. As Clara walked away, Arthur Davies grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. His face was twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What was that, Mitchell?" he hissed. "You speak Japanese? Why wasn't that on your employee file? Do you have any idea how much embarrassment you just saved us? Why didn't you tell me before?" Clara pulled her arm away from his grasp. "You never asked," she replied, her voice calm and collected. "And with all due respect, Mr. Davies, the problem wasn't a language barrier. It was a listening barrier." She walked back to table 7, leaving her manager sputtering behind her. The dynamic had shifted. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a bridge, a vital link between Mr. Watanabe and the world that had failed to understand him. She was the missing piece of the puzzle that had confounded the hotel staff for 3 long days. When the correct tea arrived, Clara took over the task of preparing it herself at the table. Her movements were graceful, precise, as though she had performed this ritual 1,000 times. She poured the pale amber liquid into Mr. Watanabe's cup, offering him the tea he had waited for. Mr. Watanabe's eyes remained fixed on Clara, studying every movement with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and understood. He took a slow sip of the tea she had carefully prepared, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, savoring the taste. "Perfect," he murmured in Japanese, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Just like my grandfather used to make." He gestured to the empty chair across from him, inviting her to join him. In the rigid, unspoken rules of the Grand Elysian, a waitress sitting with a guest was practically sacrilege. Clara caught a quick glance of Arthur Davies, who was now frantically motioning for her to refuse. But Clara, unfazed, ignored him and sat. "You speak with the Tokyo dialect," he observed, his voice sharp yet measured. "But there's a slight academic inflection. You did not grow up there." "No, sir," Clara replied in Japanese, her voice steady. "My mother was a professor. She taught me." "She taught you well," Mr. Watanabe said, a note of approval in his voice. "That is a rare skill, especially in a place like this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings, the lavish room filled with constant noise and activity. "It is a rare thing, indeed," he continued. For the next hour, as the breakfast service wound down around them, they spoke, not just about tea or the hotel, but about life, culture, and the things that truly mattered. He asked about her mother, about her academic background, the books she enjoyed reading. They discussed Kyoto's gardens, the delicate art of pottery, and the fleeting beauty of changing seasons. Remarkably, not once did he mention business, wealth, or the reason for his visit to the Grand Elysian. The conversation felt more like a reunion between old friends than a formal exchange. Mr. Watanabe was insightful and thought-provoking, his deep, calming presence putting Clara at ease. For the first time in a long time, she found herself relaxing, no longer the stressed waitress, but simply Eleanor Mitchell's daughter, talking in the language that connected her to her past. Meanwhile, the rest of the hotel staff watched from a distance, their expressions a mix of resentment and awe. Jessica, in particular, stared from across the room with seething jealousy. To her, Clara's newfound connection with Mr. Watanabe was a direct threat to her own ambitions she had always assumed would be fulfilled by adhering to the rules of the hotel's hierarchy. In contrast, Clara had found the key to unlocking the enigma that had troubled the hotel for 3 days. And in doing so, she had made herself indispensable. A new protocol was quickly established: all communications with Suite 1201 would go through Clara. Arthur Davies, swallowing his pride, reassigned Clara. No longer just a waitress, she became the personal liaison for Mr. Watanabe. His requests were peculiar, yet precise. He asked for a specific type of ink pen and rice paper to be delivered to his room. He wanted a recording of a particular koto player from the 1970s, as well as books on pre-industrial architecture. Each time, Clara didn't just translate his requests, she understood the underlying context, the hidden meaning in his words. She knew the difference between Sumi ink and regular ink, recognized the musician's name, and could navigate his preferences with the precision of someone who had been immersed in this world her whole life. That evening, Mr. Watanabe called for her. When Clara arrived at his suite, she found him sitting not in the plush living area, but on a simple cushion on the floor, practicing calligraphy on the rice paper she had sourced. "Your manager, Mr. Davies," he began, his eyes never leaving the brush in his hand, "he believes I am a wealthy, eccentric old man, a nuisance to be placated until my credit card clears." Clara remained silent, unsure how to respond. "The servers believe I am senile," he continued, his brush gliding smoothly across the rice paper, painting a character, truth or sincerity, perhaps. "The concierge believes I am rude." He paused, placed the brush down carefully, and then looked up at Clara, his gaze piercing. "Tell me, Clara," he asked, his voice now serious, almost conspiratorial, "what do you believe?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara could sense that this was no mere casual inquiry, it was a test. Her mind raced as she thought about his patient eyes, the way he listened more than he spoke. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but confident. "I believe you are looking for something," she said. "And I don't think you've found it yet." For a moment, Mr. Watanabe didn't respond. He simply stared at her, as if measuring her very soul. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. Had she said the wrong thing? Had she misunderstood the question? Then, slowly, he broke into a wide, radiant smile. He picked up his brush again, dipped it in ink, and made a single, elegant stroke on the paper. Standing up, he walked to the door and opened it for her. "You may go," he said, his voice once again gentle and grandfatherly. "Thank you for your time, Clara. You have been most helpful." Clara walked down the silent, carpeted hallway, her mind spinning with a mix of exhilaration and dread. She had just stepped through a door into a world she had never understood, and now, she had the key. But she was beginning to suspect that Mr. Watanabe was not at all who he seemed to be. The next morning, everything changed. A sleek black town car with tinted windows pulled up to the Grand Elysian's private entrance. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 40s, her severe dark hair pulled back into a tight chignon, wearing a bespoke suit that likely cost more than Clara's car. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and she exuded an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. She wasn't a guest. She was an executive. Evelyn Reed went directly to Arthur Davies's office, and though the door remained closed, her presence rippled through the hotel like a storm. 10 minutes later, Clara was summoned. When Clara entered, she found Davies standing behind his desk, looking pale and flustered. Evelyn Reed sat in the visitor's chair, her posture perfect, her attention fixed on the tablet in her lap. She didn't look up when Clara walked in. "Mitchell," Davies said, his voice strained. "This is Ms. Reed." She was an associate of Mr. Watanabe. Evelyn Reed's words sliced through the air like a cold wind, her tone indifferent as she made her introduction. "She will be overseeing his needs from now on." Clara felt a jolt of uncertainty ripple through her. "You will report to her as well as to me," Arthur Davies added, his voice tinged with frustration. Evelyn Reed, who had been silently observing, finally looked up. Her pale, icy blue eyes locked onto Clara's with a cool, unwavering gaze. "You are the translator," she stated, her voice commanding, not a question. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice shaking slightly, "I speak Japanese." "We are aware," Evelyn Reed replied dryly, her tone unfeeling. "Mr. Watanabe has been impressed with your resourcefulness." The words hung in the air, as if they were a prelude to something much bigger. "Your official role has been modified," Reed continued, her words heavy with finality. "You are now his exclusive special liaison. Your duties will go far beyond simple tea and calligraphy paper." Clara's head spun, but she couldn't find the words to protest. "You will facilitate all of Mr. Watanabe's communications," Evelyn Reed added, her voice cold, but with a hint of something else, perhaps approval. "You will be compensated for the additional responsibilities." A number was named, an amount for a weekly stipend that was more than Clara's monthly salary. Her breath caught in her chest. Stunned into silence, Clara could barely process the shift in her reality. Reed slid a thick document across the desk. "You will also sign this," she said flatly. It was a non-disclosure agreement. "What you see, what you hear, what you translate, none of it leaves the confines of your work with Mr. Watanabe. The penalties for breach are significant." Clara, mind reeling, numbly signed the document, her thoughts clouded. This was no longer about a mysterious tourist. This was corporate, international, high-stakes business. Her new life began that afternoon. Mr. Watanabe's suite was transformed into a high-tech command center. Encrypted laptops, satellite phones, and video conferencing equipment were set up with military precision by a discreet tech team. Clara's role had evolved, she was now his bridge to the outside world, the ears and the voice that connected him to the English-speaking sphere. The first call was with a team of architects in London. Clara was seated next to Mr. Watanabe, her headset on, translating his words in real time. Mr. Watanabe's focus was unwavering, his eyes closed as if in meditation, processing a full minute of English before he would open them and speak in perfect Japanese, giving precise, masterful responses about structural engineering, load-bearing capacities, and aesthetic philosophies. Clara, struggling to keep pace with the jargon, was in awe. Next came a call with a lawyer in Zurich, where discussions about complex financial instruments and asset transfers unfolded with ease. The following day, Clara translated for a video conference with a board of directors in New York, where Mr. Watanabe, through Clara's voice, calmly but ruthlessly dismantled their quarterly report, exposing inefficiencies they had missed. As Clara sat there, translating these high-level conversations, it became apparent that Mr. Watanabe was not just some wealthy old man. He was a titan, a global mastermind pulling strings behind the scenes, operating from a hotel suite in Chicago, all while remaining hidden behind the facade of a frail, non-English-speaking guest. Yet, in their quiet moments, he returned to the gentle scholar she had first met. He would ask her about her father, listening intently with genuine concern. One afternoon, noticing her rubbing her temples, he spoke softly in Japanese. "You are tired, Clara. This is demanding work." "It's okay," she said, offering a weak smile. It's just a lot to process. Tell me about your father, he prompted, his tone gentle. You work so hard for him. Hesitant at first, Clara began to open up. She spoke of her father, David, a master carpenter who had taught her the value of hard work and integrity. She told Mr. Watanabe about her father's sudden battle with Parkinson's disease, how it had stolen his ability to work, and how the care he needed exceeded the support they could afford. She confessed her guilt for not being able to do more, for not being able to provide better care for the man who had shaped her life. Mr. Watanabe listened intently, not interrupting. When she finished, there was a long silence between them. Your father sounds like a man of great character, Mr. Watanabe said softly. He built things that last. Clara's heart tightened. For the first time, Mr. Watanabe had let down his guard. A worthy legacy, he added, his voice quiet, a strange sadness in his eyes. He paused, then added something that surprised Clara. My own son, he began, his voice darkening, he prefers to tear things down. The admission was startling. The mention of a son, a figure who had disappointed him, cracked the carefully curated image Mr. Watanabe had so carefully crafted. Clara felt a surge of sympathy. For a moment, he wasn't just a powerful businessman, he was human, flawed, like anyone else. In the days that followed, as Clara worked tirelessly in her new role, small inconsistencies began to creep into her mind. While negotiating with a German automotive company, the CEO made a joke about American football. Just before Clara had finished translating, Mr. Watanabe let out a brief, sharp laugh, as if he had understood the joke. It was an imperceptible slip, but it niggled at Clara's mind. How could he have understood? Another time, while reviewing a contract, Mr. Watanabe referred to a term, real curveball, a phrase that was American baseball slang. For someone of his age and cultural background, it was odd, too modern, too specific. The most unsettling moment, however, came during a video call with a tech startup in Silicon Valley. The young CEO, brash and arrogant, muttered under his breath, "This old fossil doesn't get it." It was a muttered insult, quiet enough to be barely audible. Clara didn't translate it, there was no need. But she saw Mr. Watanabe's eyes narrow for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of cold, controlled anger. After the call, he instructed her to terminate their interest in the company. Their technology is promising, Clara remarked, surprised by his abrupt decision. Yes, he replied, his voice calm but firm. But their character is flawed. A man who disrespects his elders in private will one day disrespect his partners in public. Clara paused. The audio had been too low. There was no way Mr. Watanabe could have heard that insult, it was in English, and barely audible. How could he have understood? The possibility was too far-fetched, too outlandish to consider, so she dismissed it. She was tired, overworked. Surely, she was reading too much into it. He was her benefactor, after all. He had saved her from her dire circumstances. To doubt him felt like betrayal. That evening, Clara found herself alone in the hotel's business center, researching a point of Japanese corporate law for Mr. Watanabe. Evelyn Reed appeared behind her, her sharp voice breaking the silence. "You're doing good work, Mitchell," she said, the closest thing to a compliment Clara had heard from her. "Thank you," Clara responded, a bit taken aback. "He trusts you," Evelyn continued, her voice cold yet serious. "That's not an easy thing to earn." Clara nodded, a little uncomfortable under the weight of Evelyn's gaze. "Don't mistake his quiet nature for weakness," Evelyn said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "There is no one more ruthless or more brilliant than him when it comes to his work. He's always several steps ahead of everyone in the room." "I'm starting to realize that," Clara admitted, her voice quiet. "Just keep doing your job," Evelyn warned, her tone sharpening. "Translate what he says. Do not editorialize. Do not offer your own opinions unless asked. Just be his voice. The less you try to understand the why, the better it will be for you. Clara felt the weight of the warning settle over her. Don't get curious. Don't dig deeper. But it was already too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Who was Mr. Watanabe really? Why was he, a man with such vast power and influence, hiding behind the facade of an elderly, non-English speaking guest? What was the purpose of this elaborate charade? Clara felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice, gazing into a fog that obscured the truth. She had thought she was the key to something monumental, but now she feared she was just another pawn in a game with rules she couldn't begin to understand. And the man she was helping, the man she had grown to care for, was no longer the kind, elderly scholar. He was a shadow, and Clara was willingly letting herself be drawn into the darkness. The grand finale of Mr. Watanabe's Chicago operations was on the horizon, a proposed merger with a major American technology firm. But Clara had begun to wonder if she was about to discover a truth far darker than she could imagine. Sterling Moss, the CEO of the tech conglomerate, was exactly the type of corporate figure Mr. Watanabe had expressed disdain for: loud, brash, and dismissive. He was a classic corporate raider, aggressive and unapologetic. Yet, despite his apparent distaste for such personalities, this deal was clearly the pinnacle of his entire trip. For weeks, negotiations had been conducted remotely, with Clara acting as the linguistic conduit. Now, however, everything was coming to a head. Sterling and his team were arriving at the Grand Elysian for the final in-person meeting to sign the deal. The hotel buzzed with the energy of anticipation, staff moving swiftly to ensure everything was perfect. Arthur Davies, the hotel manager, was a nervous wreck. He polished already gleaming surfaces, barking orders at his staff in frantic preparation. This meeting, he knew, would be the culmination of his mysterious guest stay. It would determine the success of the hotel's most high-profile and enigmatic visitor. The night before the meeting, Mr. Watanabe seemed more contemplative than usual. He had dismissed Evelyn Reed early and asked Clara to stay behind for a final review of the documents. The suite was quieter than usual, the rustling of paper the only sound that filled the space. "You are troubled, Clara," Mr. Watanabe remarked without looking up from the spreadsheet. "I'm just anxious about tomorrow," she lied. He put the papers down, his gaze now fixed on her. His eyes seemed to pierce through her, unsettlingly perceptive. "That is not the truth." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Taking a deep breath, she decided to take a small risk, to test one of the suspicions that had been building inside her. "So, when we spoke with the German automotive company," she began in Japanese, her voice steady, "you laughed at the football joke before I translated it." The room seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Watanabe's expression remained unchanged, but the air shifted. He was still, the stillness of a predator sensing a trap. "My hearing is not as poor as my English," he replied smoothly. "I recognized the tone of a joke. I was laughing in anticipation of your translation." His explanation was plausible. Too plausible. It felt rehearsed, like something someone who had become accustomed to covering their tracks would say. A chill ran down Clara's spine despite the warmth of the room. "And the term curveball," she pressed, trying to maintain her composure. "It's a very American phrase." Mr. Watanabe smiled, a warm, grandfatherly smile. "I have had many American associates over the years. One picks up certain phrases, even if one cannot string them together in a sentence. You are very observant. It is a fine quality." She felt his gaze become almost a barrier, an impenetrable wall. He always had an answer for everything. But now, the cracks were beginning to show, and the suspicion that had started as a tiny thread now burned fiercely in her chest. The next day, the Sterling Moss team arrived. Robert Sterling, with his broad shoulders and booming voice, was the embodiment of a powerful CEO. He offered a handshake that was more about asserting dominance than greeting someone. Alongside him were his two vice presidents, a man and a woman who mirrored his arrogant demeanor. They were shown into the hotel's most lavish conference room, the air tense with the gravity of the meeting. Mr. Watanabe entered shortly afterward, his appearance more frail than usual. He leaned on a simple wooden cane that Clara had never seen before. For the first time, he looked small, older, the very picture of an aging patriarch. Clara walked beside him, her notepad and pen ready. Evelyn Reed, the ever-present, silent figure, followed closely behind. Davies, busy fussing over the details of the meeting, greeted Sterling with feigned cheer. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure to have you here. Can we get you anything? Coffee? Water?" Sterling waved him off dismissively. "Let's just get this done," he said, his tone already impatient. He turned his attention to Mr. Watanabe and spoke loudly, in a way one might address someone hard of hearing. "Welcome. I am Robert Sterling. Happy to finally meet you." Mr. Watanabe simply bowed in response, his face impassive. Clara translated the greeting, maintaining the professional calm expected of her. The meeting began, with Sterling taking the lead. He laid out his revised terms, aggressive terms, aiming for a lower valuation of Mr. Watanabe's assets and a stronger role for his own executives in the proposed merged company. Sterling's tone was condescending, as though he were dictating a conquest rather than negotiating a partnership. Clara translated faithfully, her voice a calm contrast to the brash, forceful nature of Sterling's words. She could feel Evelyn Reed's tension radiating from across the table. Evelyn sat rigid, her hands clasped in front of her, an unyielding observer. Meanwhile, Mr. Watanabe listened, his face an unreadable mask. He said nothing. When Sterling finished outlining his demands, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Mr. Watanabe, awaiting his response. He paused, staring down at the table for a long moment. Clara leaned in, waiting for the translation to begin. He took a deep breath, then placed his hands flat on the table and looked up, straight into Robert Sterling's eyes. When he spoke, it was not the quiet, heavily accented Japanese she had grown accustomed to. The voice that came from him was clear, strong, and resonant. It was perfect, unaccented American English. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his words cutting through the tension in the room, "your revised terms are not only unacceptable, they are insulting. And your assumption that my inability to speak your language equates to an inability to understand your greed is, frankly, laughable." The silence in the room was deafening. Robert Sterling's jaw dropped. His vice presidents were frozen, staring in stunned disbelief. Arthur Davies, who had been hovering by the door, looked like he might faint. Clara felt the floor drop from beneath her, her mind spinning. In that moment, everything she thought she knew, the conversations, the shared moments, the connection, flashed before her, now tainted by the harsh reality of this revelation. It had all been a performance. A lie. And she had been the unwitting centerpiece. Mr. Watanabe stood, pushing his chair back slowly, the frail facade vanishing. He no longer seemed small or weak. His presence grew larger in the room, filling the space with authority that dwarfed Sterling's loud, aggressive demeanor. The cane lay forgotten by his chair. "My name," Mr. Watanabe declared, his voice cold and sharp, "is not Watanabe. It is Silas Thorne." The room seemed to freeze in time. Silas Thorne. The name landed like a bomb. The reclusive CEO of Thorne Industries, the technology empire that was known for its secrecy, innovation, and ruthless efficiency. A man who hadn't been photographed in over a decade. A business legend, known for being brilliant, eccentric, and fiercely private. A man who was most definitely not Japanese. This is impossible," Robert Sterling stammered, his face ashen. "Is it?" Mr. Thorne replied, a slight, almost imperceptible smile curling on his lips. "You saw an easy mark. An old foreigner you could bully and cheat. You didn't see a partner. You saw a victim." The room went deathly quiet. "And that is why this deal is off," Silas Thorne said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. His tone was final, dismissive, and authoritative. "Evelyn, please escort these gentlemen out. Evelyn Reed, ever the silent and imposing figure, stood with her usual impassive expression, nodding slightly. This way, Mr. Sterling, she said in a voice that barely hid the satisfaction of the moment. Sterling and his team, utterly defeated and humiliated, shuffled out of the room without another word, their earlier bravado completely gone. The door closed softly behind them, leaving Clara alone with Thorne. Clara remained motionless, frozen in her chair, trying to comprehend the situation unfolding before her. The man who had called himself Mr. Watanabe, the warm, grandfatherly figure she had come to know, was no longer there. In his place stood a stranger, a man with sharp, calculating eyes that studied her every movement. She felt like she was seeing him for the first time. "Clara," Thorne said, his voice now unfamiliar and commanding. Hearing her name in his true voice was a shock, the words jagged in the air. "I believe you and I have a great deal to discuss." Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time since meeting him, she truly felt the weight of the deception. She had been more than just a translator. She had been a pawn, a piece in a game far larger and more complex than she had ever imagined. She had played her part in his elaborate test without even knowing the rules. The conference room, once the stage for high-stakes negotiations, was now silent, save for the frantic beating of Clara's heart. Silas Thorne walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her, staring out at the sprawling Chicago skyline. His posture was no longer frail, no longer the stooped figure she had once imagined. He stood tall now, his presence commanding and immense, as if the room itself bent to his will. "I owe you an explanation," he said, his back still turned to her. His voice was clear, articulate, smooth, an educated, well-traveled American's voice. It was the voice of someone who had mastered the art of persuasion. Clara found her voice, though it came out as a strained whisper, barely able to contain her shock. "You lied to me." "I did," he acknowledged, his tone without apology. There was no regret in his words, only cold recognition of the facts. "Every word I spoke to you in Japanese was part of a carefully constructed narrative." Her mind reeled. The moments of kindness, the stories of his grandfather, the parable about the fisherman, all of it was a lie, fabricated to manipulate her. "Why?" she demanded, her anger rising, cutting through the shock. "To make a fool of me. To use you to humiliate Robert Sterling," Thorne said, walking slowly towards the table. There was a new energy in his step, a vigor that belied the elderly persona he had worn so convincingly. Sterling was an afterthought, a useful idiot. But not the primary target. Clara's stomach churned. She could feel the scale of the manipulation now. All of it, the tea, the test with the fisherman, the conversation about her father, had been designed to mold her reactions. Thorne had orchestrated it all. "The entire exercise," he continued, "from the moment I checked into this hotel, was a test. I call it a Socratic filter. I create a problem. In this case, a high-value guest who is completely incomprehensible. And I watch how people react. It tells me more about their character than any resume or interview ever could." He stopped in front of her, his eyes locked on hers, intense and unrelenting. "The staff at this hotel? They failed spectacularly. They saw a problem to be ignored, a nuisance to be managed. Your manager, Mr. Davies, saw a threat to his hotel's rating and a potential cash cow to be placated. They were all transactional, superficial." He leaned forward, hands on the table, his gaze piercing. "But you," he said, his voice lowering with intensity, "you were different. You didn't see a problem. You saw a person. You didn't hear gibberish. You listened for meaning. Even before you knew I was a person of influence, you showed empathy. That was the first gate." Clara stared at him, her mind spinning as the enormity of his plan crashed over her. He had watched, analyzed, and manipulated every moment of their interactions. The tea, the fisherman's story, even her father's illness, they had all been data points. "The hojicha tea," he continued. That was a test of specific knowledge and attention to detail. The fisherman parable. A test of your values, to see if you understood the difference between short-term profit and long-term sustainable growth. Her heart ached, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. And my father? Was his illness just another data point for you? Did you enjoy listening to me bare my soul, all so you could check a box on your psychological profile? For the first time, Clara saw something flicker across Thorne's face. A hint of something that wasn't cold calculation. It might have been regret, or perhaps something deeper, perhaps even recognition. That, he said quietly, was part of the test. I didn't anticipate your genuine decency and love for your family. Your stories about him, they were a stark reminder of what this is all about. Integrity, craftsmanship, building things that last. Qualities that are nearly extinct in my world. Clara's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She had always felt like an outsider in a world ruled by greed and ambition, but now Thorne's admission painted the reality of his world in a starker light. He straightened, the intensity in his eyes never wavering. I didn't come to Chicago to buy Robert Sterling's company. I came here to find a person. The weight of his words hit her like a wave. For the last 5 years, he continued, my company has been developing a new initiative, the Thorne Foundation. It's a philanthropic endeavor with an endowment of several $1 billion. Its mission is to fund projects that bridge cultural and linguistic divides. Educational programs, technological aids, preservation of disappearing languages. It's the legacy I want to leave behind. He paused, letting the enormity of his words settle in the room. More important than any microchip or algorithm my company has ever designed, Thorne said, his voice quieter but filled with a quiet intensity. But a foundation of that scale cannot be run by the same sharks who run my corporation. It needs a leader with a different skill set. Not ruthlessness, but empathy. Not a head for numbers, but a heart for people. Clara's mind reeled as he continued. She had been the subject of his grand experiment, his Socratic filter. But now, the scope of what he was saying began to shift in her mind. She had no idea what his true intentions were, but she could sense that she was at the heart of something far bigger than herself. I've been searching for that person for 2 years, he said. I've interviewed academics, diplomats, non-profit executives. They were all qualified. None of them were right. Clara's head spun as he looked directly at her, and everything suddenly clicked. So, I was part of this elaborate test, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he answered. You were on a list of 17 people in Chicago. Your name was chosen because you possess the qualities I need. Empathy, understanding, a genuine desire to listen and help. Everything since then has been a confirmation of my hypothesis. You've handled pressure, navigated complex technical and financial information, and showed loyalty. But most of all, you showed empathy for a lie, and that cannot be faked. Clara's anger still burned inside her, but now it was competing with a growing sense of awe. He hadn't just lied to her. He had built an entire world around her to test how she would navigate it. And now, she understood the full scale of the game she had been pulled into. What? Clara asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What do you want from me? Silas Thorne's expression softened, and he answered her with unwavering certainty. I'm not offering you a job as my translator, Clara, he said, his voice calm and firm. I'm offering you a position on the board of the Thorne Foundation. I want you to head its new global cultural initiative. Clara's mind reeled as the words echoed in her mind. I want you to take the philosophy you articulated in your answer to the fisherman riddle and apply it on a global scale. I want you to teach the world how to mend its nets. He named a salary that sent her thoughts spiraling, making the room feel like it was spinning. The sum was more than she could have ever imagined, a sum that could change everything for her and her father. But it wasn't just about the money. Thorne spoke of resources that could change lives, of opportunities to build a legacy that would honor her mother's memory in ways she had never dreamed possible. It was everything she had ever wanted, freedom from her financial burdens, a chance to make a difference, and a fulfillment of her deepest values. Yet the weight of the offer was shrouded in a deep sense of betrayal. He had manipulated her. He had used her mother's memory, her desperation, and her emotions to engineer this moment. She had been part of his grand experiment from the start. He hadn't just offered her a job, he had torn apart her reality and was now presenting her with the opportunity to rebuild it, but only under his terms. "I need to think," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of her decision felt crushing. Could she work for a man she wasn't sure she could ever trust? Could she afford not to? Clara left the conference room in a daze, her thoughts spinning uncontrollably. The hallway that had once felt so familiar now seemed foreign, distant. She spotted Jessica and Kevin near a service station, huddled together, whispering urgently. As she approached, they fell silent, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The entire hotel was buzzing with gossip. The crazy old Japanese man was Silas Thorne. And Clara, quiet, unassuming Clara, was at the center of it all. She didn't stop. She walked right past them, needing space, needing air to breathe. Clara found herself in the hotel's deserted library, the same place where she had first watched Mr. Watanabe, now Silas Thorne, sit in quiet contemplation. The memory seemed so distant, like it belonged to another life. She sank into one of the leather armchairs, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. The sharpest of them all was betrayal. Thorne had played with her emotions, her history, her financial desperation. He had used the memory of her mother as a tool for his test, and dissected her character as if she were nothing more than a specimen in a lab experiment. The coldness of it all was horrifying. But beneath the betrayal, something else flickered, a spark of validation. For years, Clara had felt invisible. Her skills, the passion for language and culture her mother had instilled in her, had seemed useless in a world that only valued her for the plates she carried and the wine pairings she memorized. But Silas Thorne, for all his manipulation and deception, had seen her. He had recognized her value when no one else had, not even herself. And the offer? It was a lifeline. The money, the influence, the chance to honor her mother's legacy, it was a way out of her crushing reality. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about purpose. It was about the opportunity to lead an initiative that did what her mother had dedicated her life to, fostering cross-cultural understanding. It was a chance to make her mother proud, to turn the pain of her loss into a force for good in the world. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the storm of her thoughts. It was a text from her father's caregiver, David. "Had a good morning. Was telling me stories about your mom and her trip to Japan again. He misses her." The message pierced through the whirlwind in her mind. Her father. Her mother's legacy. This was what mattered. A knock on the library door startled her. Arthur Davies entered, his face pale and slick with sweat, his posture hunched as if he'd seen his career flash before his eyes and then explode in flames. "Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar, desperate familiarity. "Clara," he continued, his words oozing insincerity, "I just wanted to congratulate you." "Congratulations?" Clara's voice was flat, tinged with disbelief. "We're all tremendously proud," he added, clearly trying to play the part. "I always knew you had great potential." Clara's gaze hardened. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. This was the same man who had reprimanded her, belittled her, and treated her as nothing more than a cog in his machine. "Did you, Mr. Davies?" she asked coldly. "Yes, of course," he said, too quickly. "And I hope in your new capacity, you'll remember the team here at the Grand Elysian. We'd be honored to host any future events for the Thorne Foundation." Clara saw him for what he truly was, a transactional, superficial man who saw only the potential for profit. There was no substance to him. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, standing up from the chair. "I have to go." She walked away, leaving him standing in the silence of the library, a relic of a life she was about to leave behind. As she moved toward the elevator, she knew what she had to do. Trusting Silas Thorne would be a constant challenge. He was a master manipulator, a grandmaster of human chess. But his offer wasn't entirely about power or control, it was about something that resonated with her on a deeper level. He had tested her, yes. But in doing so, he had revealed his own vulnerabilities. For all his ruthlessness, there was a purpose she could believe in. He wanted to build something that lasted, something that was built on integrity. Just like her father. Clara took the elevator back up to the penthouse floor. She found Thorne not in the suite but in the hallway, deep in conversation with Evelyn Reed. They stopped when they saw her. Clara walked straight toward him, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I have conditions," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Thorne raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Evelyn remained impassive as always. "First," Clara said, her voice strong, "you will never lie to me again. We will operate with complete transparency. If I am to help you build bridges around the world, I will not do it from a foundation of deception." "Agreed," Thorne said without hesitation. "Second," she continued, "the foundation will establish a special grant for elder care, specifically for families of skilled laborers who have lost their ability to work. We will call it the David Mitchell Grant." Thorne's smile spread slowly, genuinely this time. "A brilliant addition to our portfolio, Ms. Mitchell." "Agreed." "And third," she said, her breath steady, "I want you to come with me to meet my father. I want you to sit with him as Silas Thorne and listen to his stories. I want you to see the man whose integrity you claim to admire." The words hit him with unexpected weight. A billionaire, the world's most reclusive genius, making a personal visit to a retired carpenter in a modest suburban home. It was a test of her own. He looked at her for a long moment, the strategist assessing this new move. Then he nodded. "I would be honored," he said softly. "When do we leave?" Clara knew in that moment she had made the right choice. She was no longer a victim in his game. She was a player. And now, she was ready to make her own moves. 2 weeks later, Clara stood in the doorway of her father's small, quiet house. Silas Thorne stood beside her, no longer a billionaire but a guest, holding a thoughtfully wrapped gift. Inside, her father, David, sat in his favorite armchair, his hands trembling too much to shake hers. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir," he said warmly. "Clara's told me you're her new boss." "I'm her new partner," Thorne corrected gently. "And I've heard a great deal about you." For the next hour, Clara watched as the brilliant businessman, who had manipulated her so carefully, sat in rapt attention, listening to her father speak of the integrity of his craft. There was no test, no analysis, just genuine learning. Thorne was listening, absorbing the quiet wisdom of a man who had built his life on honesty and hard work. As they left, Thorne turned to David. "Your daughter spoke of a wise fisherman," he said sincerely. "But the wisest man is the one who teaches his child to build a strong foundation." "Thank you." In the car, Clara asked about the gift. "A first-edition book on traditional Japanese woodworking," Thorne explained. "I thought he would appreciate the pictures." It was a gesture of pure empathy. Proof that he was capable of the understanding she had demanded. The following Monday, Clara walked through the gleaming front doors of the Thorne Industries skyscraper. Her name was on the directory, Clara Mitchell, Director, Global Cultural Initiative. Her new office had a view that stretched to the horizon, a world of possibilities laid out before her. On her desk sat a single object, the small ceramic teapot from the hotel. Beside it was a note, a reminder that the most important conversations often begin with a simple offer of understanding. "Welcome, Clara. Let's get to work." She smiled. The journey had been a labyrinth of deception, but it had led her here. She understood Silas Thorne's language now, a complex lexicon of tests and strategies. He had seen her value when no one else had. And now, she was no longer a pawn in his game. She was a player, ready to make her own moves. With her mother's legacy as her guide and her father's integrity as her foundation, Clara was ready to teach the world how to mend its nets. And so Clara's story reminds us that the most extraordinary opportunities can be hidden in the most ordinary of circumstances. It wasn't her ability to speak a foreign language that changed her life. It was her willingness to listen with her heart. In a world that so often judges people by their title, their wealth, or the language they speak, Clara chose to see the person behind the silence. Her journey from a struggling waitress to a global leader wasn't about luck. It was about character. It begs the question, who in our own lives are we overlooking? What incredible potential are we failing to see because we're not truly listening? If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like, it truly helps our channel grow. Share it with someone who you think needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had an experience where a simple act of kindness or understanding led to something completely unexpected?